Most people don't fail because they're lazy or unmotivated. They fail because they never learned that discipline is a system you build, not a feeling you wait for. They operate on emotion, impulse, and mood, which means they operate on nothing at all. In this video, I'll reveal Machiavelli's 7 laws of self-discipline that transform you from someone controlled by circumstances into someone who controls themselves so completely that external chaos cannot touch you. Now, imagine this. An intelligent person sets ambitious goals every January. They start strong, full of excitement and determination. Within weeks, the excitement fades. Old habits return. By March, they've abandoned everything they promised themselves, and they're back where they started, feeling weaker and more defeated than before. Sitting alone, they ask themselves, why can't I follow through on anything? Here's the truth. They're waiting for motivation to save them when motivation is the least reliable force in human psychology. While they depend on feelings that come and go, disciplined people build systems that function regardless of how they feel. By the end of this video, you'll understand the dark mechanics that separate those who achieve relentlessly from those who start enthusiastically but finish nothing. You'll see why certain people seem to possess supernatural consistency while others cycle endlessly through inspiration and collapse. And you'll learn the cold, unforgiving principles that Machiavelli understood about mastering yourself before you can master anything else. Before we start, type this in the comments to lock it in: I govern myself with ruthless discipline. Most people never develop real self-discipline, not because they're weak or incapable, but because they've been sold a beautiful lie that discipline is about motivation, inspiration, and feeling ready to do hard things. From every self-help guru and motivational speaker, we hear the same fairy tale. Get inspired. Feel passionate. Wait until you're mentally ready. Follow your motivation. Listen to your body. Honor your feelings. And somehow, through this emotional guidance system, you'll achieve extraordinary things. But look at the evidence around you. The people who wait to feel motivated before they act, who need inspiration to do what they already know they should do, who only move when the mood is right. Where are they? Exactly where they were last year. Still waiting for the perfect emotional state. Still hoping tomorrow will be the day they finally feel ready. Still trapped in a cycle where every burst of enthusiasm is followed by collapse, and every promise to themselves gets broken. Machiavelli saw what most people refuse to accept. The world doesn't reward those who depend on their feelings. It rewards those who've built systems of self-governance so complete that their emotions become irrelevant to their actions. When you wait for motivation, you give control of your life to the most unreliable force that exists. Feelings change hourly. Moods shift with sleep, stress, and chemistry. If your discipline depends on feeling motivated, you have no discipline at all. You have temporary enthusiasm that will abandon you the moment things become difficult. This is why passionate beginnings so consistently lead to shameful endings. The system isn't broken. It simply isn't based on the motivational fantasy you were sold. Real discipline is built on strategic self-control, on systems that function mechanically, on consequences that enforce behavior regardless of emotional state. Smart people build structures that make the right actions automatic and the wrong actions costly. The naive wait for inspiration and wonder why nothing ever changes. The disciplined act first, and let feelings follow if they choose to. Machiavelli's laws aren't about becoming robotic or joyless. They're about becoming free. Free from being controlled by impulses. Free from being sabotaged by moods. Free from being defeated by your own inconsistency. He showed that if you cannot govern yourself, you cannot govern anything else. Your relationships will be chaotic. Your career will be inconsistent. Your health will deteriorate. Your goals will remain fantasies. Not because the world is unfair, but because you're unreliable. The moment you accept that discipline is built, not felt, you stop waiting for motivation and start constructing systems that make discipline inevitable. That's when nothing can defeat you because you've eliminated your own capacity for self-betrayal. Law 1. Command your impulses before they command you. Most people live as prisoners of their immediate urges. They feel hungry and eat immediately. They feel boredom and reach for their phone instantly. They feel discomfort and flee from it automatically. Every impulse gets obeyed without question, without delay, without any governance whatsoever. Machiavelli understood that the person who cannot delay gratification cannot build anything substantial. When every urge is instantly satisfied, you train yourself to be a slave to sensation, incapable of sustained action toward distant goals. You're working on something important and you feel the urge to check social media. Most people obey instantly, disrupting their focus, fragmenting their attention, proving to themselves that impulses are masters and they are servants. You, however, notice the urge, acknowledge it, and choose deliberately to continue working. That small act of governance is everything. It's the difference between someone who controls their attention and someone whose attention is controlled by whatever stimulus appears. This isn't about suppressing all pleasure. It's about understanding that every time you obey an impulse without conscious choice, you strengthen the pattern of impulse obedience. You train yourself to be reactive, not deliberate. Controlled, not in control. Machiavelli observed that those who cannot resist small temptations will be destroyed by large ones. If you cannot govern the urge to eat something unhealthy, how will you govern the urge to quit when your goals become difficult? If you cannot control the impulse to waste time, how will you control the impulse to give up when sacrifices are required? Watch people carefully. Who operates on pure impulse? They eat whatever they want, buy whatever catches their attention, say whatever they feel, act on every urge. They're completely at the mercy of their own nervous system. Who operates with deliberate control? They pause between urge and action. They choose consciously. They delay gratification routinely. The impulsive live in constant chaos, controlled entirely by external triggers and internal urges, wondering why their life has no direction. The repressed deny every urge and become rigid, joyless, eventually breaking under the pressure of total suppression. Disciplined people acknowledge impulses without automatically obeying them. They create space between stimulus and response. They feel the urge to quit, to eat, to distract, to avoid, and they consciously choose what happens next. They delay gratification not as punishment but as training in self-governance. When you master the gap between impulse and action, you reclaim sovereignty over your own behavior. You stop being a puppet controlled by urges and become a strategist who decides which impulses serve your goals and which ones sabotage them. That self-command makes you nearly impossible to manipulate because you're no longer controlled by your own immediate desires. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I acknowledge my impulses but I choose my actions. Law 2. Build systems that eliminate willpower. In the architecture of discipline, most people rely entirely on willpower, which is the weakest possible foundation. Willpower is a limited resource that depletes throughout the day. Depending on it means your discipline only lasts as long as your mental energy does. Machiavelli knew that the wise don't depend on their strength in moments of weakness. They build structures that make the right behavior automatic and the wrong behavior difficult or impossible. You tell yourself you'll eat healthier through sheer willpower. Every day, you must fight temptation. Every evening, exhausted from making decisions all day, you collapse and eat poorly. Your willpower ran out. Now imagine someone who simply doesn't keep junk food in their house. They've removed the decision entirely. They don't resist temptation daily. They've structured their environment so temptation doesn't exist. Same goal, completely different strategy. This isn't about being weak. It's about being strategic. When you depend on willpower, you're fighting the same battle every day and eventually losing. When you build systems, you fight the battle once by changing your environment, then the right behavior becomes effortless. Machiavelli taught that the ruler who depends on personal virtue alone will be overthrown when that virtue wavers. But the ruler who builds institutional systems can govern effectively even on days when personal strength fails. Look at who maintains discipline long term. The person who automates their finances so saving happens without decision. The person who schedules their workout at the same time daily so it becomes routine, not choice. The person who structures their workspace to eliminate distractions rather than resisting them constantly. They're not using more willpower. They're using better systems. The willpower-dependent exhaust themselves resisting temptation daily, feel strong when winning, collapse when tired, then conclude they're simply weak. The system avoiders think discipline should be pure mental strength, reject structure as cheating, and stay inconsistent forever. Disciplined people build environments that support their goals. They remove friction from right actions and add friction to wrong actions. They automate decisions wherever possible. They create systems so robust that their discipline functions even when their willpower fails. When you eliminate dependence on willpower, discipline stops being a daily battle and becomes an automatic function of properly designed systems. That systematic discipline makes you impossible to stop because you're not depending on feeling strong, you've engineered strength into your environment. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I build systems that make discipline automatic. Law 3. Make discipline your identity, not your effort. Most people treat discipline as something they do occasionally when they feel particularly motivated. They have disciplined days and undisciplined days. They're disciplined in some areas and chaotic in others. Discipline is an action they sometimes take, not a core identity they embody. Machiavelli understood that those who are disciplined only when it's convenient are actually undisciplined with occasional exceptions. Real discipline is who you are, not what you do when you feel like it. You say you're disciplined, but you only train when motivated, only eat well when it's easy, only work hard when you're being watched. Your discipline is conditional, situational, temporary. Now consider someone who operates from the identity, I am a disciplined person. When faced with a choice, they don't debate. They don't negotiate with themselves. They simply ask, what would a disciplined person do? And they do that. No drama. No internal argument. Their identity decides for them. This isn't about fake it till you make it delusion. It's about understanding that identity determines behavior far more powerfully than willpower does. When discipline is your identity, violating it means violating yourself, which creates a psychological cost that enforces consistency. Machiavelli observed that those who are one thing today and another thing tomorrow are trusted by no one, not even themselves. You cannot build anything significant on inconsistent behavior. If your actions contradict daily, you're not disciplined. You're chaos wearing discipline as an occasional costume. Watch who actually achieves long term. The person who says, I'm someone who finishes what they start and then acts accordingly in every situation. The person whose identity as a professional means they work excellently regardless of supervision. The person who has integrated discipline so deeply that being undisciplined would feel like betraying themselves. They're not using more effort. They're operating from a more fundamental level. The occasional act is disciplined sometimes and feel virtuous, then act chaotically other times and makes excuses, building nothing because consistency doesn't exist. The rigid declare extreme identities they can't sustain, then collapse under the pressure and abandon everything. Disciplined people shape their identity deliberately. They decide who they are, then act consistently with that identity. They don't debate whether to be disciplined at each moment. Their identity has already been decided. Their only job is to align their behavior with the person they've chosen to be. When discipline becomes your identity, individual choices become easy because you're not deciding whether to be disciplined, you're simply being who you are. That identity-level discipline makes you extraordinarily consistent because violating discipline means violating your sense of self. Drop this affirmation in the comments: discipline is not what I do, it's who I am. Law 4. Create consequences that cannot be ignored. In the mechanics of discipline, most people fail because there's no real cost to failure. They set goals, break them, feel bad briefly, then repeat the cycle endlessly. Breaking promises to themselves has no consequence beyond temporary guilt, which isn't enough to change behavior. Machiavelli knew that without enforcement, rules are just suggestions. If violating discipline costs nothing, discipline will be violated constantly. You must build consequences so real that failure becomes more painful than the discomfort of staying disciplined. You tell yourself you'll write every day. You skip a day. Nothing happens. You feel slightly guilty, then move on. The next day, skipping is easier. Soon, the goal is abandoned. Compare that to someone who's publicly committed to posting their work daily, or they donate money to a cause they hate. Now failure has a cost. Real cost. Social cost. Financial cost. Suddenly, discipline isn't optional. The consequences make it necessary. This isn't about being harsh to yourself. It's about understanding that humans respond to incentives and consequences. Without cost for failure, most people will take the path of least resistance. With meaningful cost, that path becomes the disciplined one. Machiavelli taught that love without fear becomes contempt. Similarly, goals without consequences become wishes. If there's no punishment for failure, why would you endure discomfort to succeed? Look at who maintains discipline. The person who's made public commitments they'd be embarrassed to break. The person who's invested money they'll lose if they quit. The person who's built accountability with others who will notice and call them out for inconsistency. They've structured real consequences that make discipline the easier path than failure. The consequence-free set endless goals with zero enforcement, break them routinely, and genuinely wonder why they never follow through. The self-punishment creates such extreme consequences that one mistake triggers complete collapse and self-hatred. Disciplined people build appropriate consequences. Public accountability for social cost. Financial stakes for monetary cost. Tracking systems that make patterns visible and impossible to deny. They create situations where maintaining discipline is less painful than facing the consequences of failure. When you build real consequences for undisciplined behavior, you stop depending on motivation and start responding to the structure you've created. That consequence-backed discipline makes you reliable because failure costs enough that you'll endure discomfort to avoid it. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I build consequences that enforce my discipline. Law 5. Train in obscurity, demonstrate in public. Most people do the opposite of what works. They talk endlessly about their goals, post their plans publicly, seek validation for intentions rather than results. Then they train inconsistently or not at all because the social reward has already been received for just talking about it. Machiavelli understood that the strategically disciplined do their difficult work in private where no one is watching, then reveal results in public when there's something undeniable to show. You announce your fitness goal to everyone. You post about starting a new routine. You get likes and encouragement. You feel accomplished. But you've received the social reward before doing the work, which reduces the motivation to actually do the work. Compare that to someone who says nothing, trains alone for 6 months, then appears transformed. Their discipline happened in silence. Their results speak in public. This isn't about being secretive. It's about understanding that premature publicity dilutes discipline. When you talk about what you're going to do, you get a dopamine hit from social approval, which your brain processes as if you've already achieved something. Then the actual hard work feels less necessary. Machiavelli observed that those who promise everything deliver nothing, while those who promise nothing and deliver everything command respect. Words about future discipline mean nothing. Demonstrated results of past discipline mean everything. Watch the pattern. Who talks constantly about their goals and plans but never shows results? They're consuming the reward of accomplishment through talking about it, leaving no fuel for actual achievement. Who stays quiet about what they're building and suddenly reveals something impressive? They've channeled all energy into the work, not the performance of working. The oversharers broadcast every intention, seeking validation constantly, then produce nothing because the social reward has been collected up front. The invisible never share anything and receive no recognition even when they achieve because nobody knows what they've done. Disciplined people train in private. They build in silence. They endure difficulty without announcing it. They develop capability without performing the development. Then, when they have results, they let the results speak. They demonstrate what they've become rather than discussing what they'll do. When you shift from talking about discipline to being disciplined in private, all your energy flows into actual achievement rather than the appearance of working. That silent discipline makes you dangerous because people underestimate you until results make your capability undeniable. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I build in silence and let my results speak. Law 6. Make discipline compound through consistency. In the mathematics of self-discipline, most people underestimate the exponential power of consistency over time. They want dramatic overnight transformation. When small daily actions don't produce immediate visible results, they quit and chase the next exciting approach. Machiavelli knew that sustainable power isn't built through dramatic bursts of effort. It's built through small, consistent actions that compound over time until they create results impossible to achieve through intensity alone. You commit to reading 10 pages daily. Some days you feel inspired and read 50. Other days you read nothing because you don't feel motivated. You're inconsistent. Your discipline is based on mood. Years pass and you've read almost nothing. Compare that to someone who reads exactly 10 pages daily regardless of how they feel. No exceptions. No negotiations. 10 pages when tired. 10 pages when busy. 10 pages when unmotivated. In 5 years, they've read 50 books while you've read 5. This isn't about being inflexible. It's about understanding that consistency beats intensity every time. Small actions repeated daily compound into massive results. Dramatic actions done occasionally compound into nothing. Machiavelli taught that he who advances slowly but never stops will overtake the runner who sprints powerfully but inconsistently. The steady accumulation of small disciplines creates capability that cannot be matched by occasional enthusiasm. Look at who actually builds impressive capability. The person who trains moderately but never misses. The person who saves small amounts consistently rather than large amounts randomly. The person who improves 1% daily rather than attempting 30% improvements monthly. They understand compound growth. The inconsistent enthusiasts work intensely when motivated, produce some progress, then stop when enthusiasm fades, losing whatever ground they gained. The perfectionists demand flawless massive action every day, burn out instantly, and quit completely. Disciplined people identify sustainable minimum actions. They find the smallest version of the discipline that they can maintain forever. They do that minimum daily without exception. They let consistency compound the results over time rather than seeking dramatic immediate transformation. When you shift from intensity-based discipline to consistency-based discipline, you stop cycling through inspiration and collapse and start building steadily toward guaranteed long-term results. That compounding discipline makes you unstoppable because while others sprint and quit repeatedly, you advance slowly but permanently. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I win through consistency, not intensity. Law 7. Eliminate options that enable weakness. In the final law of discipline, Machiavelli reveals that the strategically disciplined don't rely on strength to resist temptation. They remove temptation entirely. Most people keep every option available, then exhaust themselves resisting choices they shouldn't have access to in the first place. Machiavelli understood that having to choose discipline repeatedly means discipline will eventually fail. The truly disciplined structure their life so that undisciplined options simply don't exist. They win by elimination, not resistance. You want to focus deeply on work, so every day you resist checking your phone. You feel virtuous when you succeed. You feel weak when you fail. You're fighting the same battle daily. Now imagine someone who puts their phone in another room before working, or uses an app that locks them out during work hours. They've eliminated the option. They don't resist. They've made the undisciplined choice impossible. This isn't about lacking willpower. It's about being strategic with your limitations. When you keep every option available and rely on repeatedly choosing the right one, you're depending on perfect decision-making. When you eliminate wrong options, you've made perfect decision-making unnecessary. Machiavelli observed that the general who burns the ships after landing gives his soldiers no option but to fight forward. Similarly, the disciplined person who eliminates escape routes has no option but to succeed. Watch who maintains discipline effortlessly. The person who deleted social media apps rather than trying to use them moderately. The person who ended friendships that consistently led to destructive behavior. The person who structured their finances so spending money impulsively became impossible. They're not stronger. They're smarter about removing choices. The willpower-dependent keep every option available, resist daily, eventually fail, then blame themselves for weakness. The indecisive keep so many options available that they're paralyzed, never committing to discipline because escape is always accessible. Disciplined people ruthlessly eliminate options that enable their weakness. They identify the choices that consistently lead to failure and they remove access to those choices entirely. They don't keep junk food and resist it. They don't keep it. They don't maintain toxic relationships and try to have boundaries. They end them. They don't keep distractions available and attempt self-control. They eliminate the distractions. When you remove options that enable weakness, you stop fighting temptation daily and start living in an environment where only disciplined options exist. That elimination-based discipline makes you nearly impossible to break because you've removed your own ability to choose weakness. Drop this affirmation in the comments: I eliminate options that enable my weakness. Now you know Machiavelli's 7 laws of self-discipline. How commanding your impulses before they command you creates the foundation of all self-governance. How building systems that eliminate willpower dependency makes discipline automatic regardless of how you feel. How making discipline your identity transforms it from occasional effort into consistent behavior. How creating consequences that cannot be ignored makes maintaining discipline easier than facing the cost of failure. How training in obscurity and demonstrating in public channels all energy into results rather than performance. How making discipline compound through consistency creates exponential results impossible through intensity. And how eliminating options that enable weakness removes daily temptation battles entirely. But none of this matters if it just stays as fascinating concepts you intellectually appreciate but never implement. The question isn't whether these laws work, they've created every significant achievement in human history. The question is whether you'll stay undisciplined and controlled by impulses, or become disciplined and in complete control of yourself. Will you keep obeying every impulse instantly or finally create space between urge and action? Will you keep depending on willpower that fails when you're tired or build systems that function regardless of your energy? Will you keep treating discipline as occasional effort or make it the core identity that determines all your choices? Will you keep breaking promises to yourself without consequence or create enforcement that makes discipline necessary? Will you keep broadcasting intentions for validation or train silently and let your results speak? Will you keep chasing dramatic transformation through intensity or embrace the compound power of daily consistency? And will you keep maintaining access to every temptation and exhausting yourself resisting? Or finally eliminate options that enable your weakness? Nothing can defeat you once you govern yourself so completely that external circumstances become irrelevant. If this opened your mind to how real self-discipline actually works, hit the like button. Subscribe for more content on dark psychology and strategic self-mastery. And share this video with someone who needs to stop waiting for motivation and start building discipline. Your transformation doesn't start when you understand these laws. It starts when you enforce them. Drop this final affirmation in the comments: I am disciplined, systematic, and impossible to break.